inside every cabin on a 1,300-foot cargo ship. A ship like this is 1,300 feet long, 4 football fields end to end. It carries 24,000 containers and weighs over 200,000 tons fully loaded. And somewhere inside that steel hull, spread across 8 or 9 decks, are the rooms where 22 people actually live for the next 4 to 6 months. The cabins tell the real story. Every single person on that ship sleeps in a room that tells you exactly what their job is, how much the company thinks their comfort is worth, and how close they are to the danger. There are 3 layers to this tour. The bottom of the house, where the ship's actual labor lives. The middle, where the officers split their time between sleep and command. And the top, where one room looks nothing like the other 21. By the end of this, you'll know why a cook's cabin and a chief engineer's cabin can sit 40 feet apart and feel like they belong on 2 different ships entirely. Let's start at the bottom. On a container ship this size, the crew doesn't live scattered around the vessel. They live stacked in one block, bolted onto the stern like a white apartment building welded to the back of a floating warehouse. In the industry, it's called the accommodation block, or just the house. The house has a rule almost every seafarer will tell you. Within the first 5 minutes of meeting you, the lower you sleep, the harder your job, and the louder your room. The bottom decks hold the ratings. Ordinary seamen, able seamen, oilers, wipers, the cook, the messman. These are the people doing the physical work of keeping a ship moving, chipping rust, painting steel, standing lookout in the rain, working in an engine room that regularly hits 40 degrees Celsius. Their cabins sit directly above the engine room. A ship this size runs a 2-stroke marine diesel producing somewhere around 70,000 horsepower, with cylinders tall enough to stand inside. That engine runs continuously, full output, for weeks at a stretch. The vibration climbs straight up through the steel and lands right on top of you. Ratings sleeping on the lower decks describe it the same way almost every time. The engine becomes something you feel instead of hear after the first week. It shows up in the mattress, in the desk, in your teeth if you're unlucky. The rooms themselves are small. Single berths on most modern ships now, which is actually an upgrade. 20 years ago, it was common to share. A bunk, a small desk, a locker, sometimes a porthole, sometimes nothing but a vent. Bathrooms are often shared down the corridor, split between 2 or 3 cabins. There's a fiddle rail on every shelf, a latch on every drawer, because the moment you stop bolting things down at sea, they become projectiles. These are also usually the crew members with the least seniority, the least pay, and often the longest contracts. 9 months isn't unusual for an able seaman from certain manning agencies. 9 months above the loudest engine on the ship in the smallest room. Walk into one of these cabins mid-voyage, and the personal items tell you the same story as the bunk dimensions. A phone propped against a water bottle for video calls home. A small calendar on the wall with days crossed off, not weeks, days, because the voyage is long enough that counting weeks feels too slow. A family photograph taped to the locker door at eye level, positioned so it's the last thing visible before the light goes off. These aren't decorations, they're anchors. The physical work is hard, and the room is loud, and the contract is long, and the photograph on the locker is doing a specific job every single night. Then there's the cook. Technically a rating, but functionally one of the most important people on board, because morale on a ship with no shore leave for weeks at a time runs almost entirely through the galley. The cook's cabin sits close to the mess, and the galley itself, keeping him a few steps from his job even when he's off the clock. Ovens running, exhaust fans rattling, prep work starting before sunrise. His room is small, functional, and permanently smells faintly of whatever's cooking 2 decks below. In the deepest part of the accommodation block is the crew mess itself, and this is where the ranks blur for exactly 1 hour a day. Ratings eat together at long tables bolted to the deck. There's a TV in the corner playing whatever's been downloaded that week, because most crews still can't stream reliably from the lower decks even with better satellite internet, now reaching the bridge and officer areas first. It's the closest thing to a common room this part of the ship has. Move up a deck, sometimes 2, and the whole feel of the ship changes. This is where the junior officers live. 3rd mate, 4th engineer, 2nd engineer on some vessels depending on rank structure. Junior deck cadets too on ships that carry trainees. The rooms get a little bigger here. A proper single bed instead of a berth. A private bathroom starts to appear, sometimes shared between 2 cabins through a connecting door rather than down a public corridor. A small sitting area. A desk that's actually used for something other than storage. The part that never shows up on any deck plan. The middle decks are where the ship's actual watchkeeping schedule lives, and that schedule wrecks your sleep on its own terms, independent of engine noise entirely. Officers work 4 hours on, 8 hours off, around the clock, on a rotation that runs against daylight, against meal times, against the rest of the ship's rhythm. A 3rd mate might come off the 12 to 4 a.m. watch, eat a meal alone in an empty officer's mess, and try to fall asleep at 5 a.m. while the sun is coming up through a porthole that has no blackout curtain, because nobody installs blackout curtains on a cargo ship. Chief mates and 2nd engineers get slightly larger cabins, 1 level up again, closer to the cargo control room or the engine control room they're responsible for. Their rooms function as offices as much as they do bedrooms. A cargo plan pinned to the wall, a laptop permanently open to stability calculations, a phone that rings if a reefer container starts throwing an alarm at 2 a.m. because someone has to know if 40 tons of frozen cargo just lost power in the middle of the Pacific. This is the layer of the ship where you stop asking, how big is the room, and start asking, how often does that room actually get slept in? There's a rank that sits slightly apart from the rest of this layer, easy to overlook. Deck cadets and engine cadets. Trainees still working toward their license often get the smallest cabins on the middle decks, sometimes converted spare rooms rather than purpose-built ones. They stand watches alongside officers to learn the job, but they don't yet get the pay or the private space that comes with the rank. A cadet's room can be the size of a walk-in closet, bunk on one side, a shelf of textbooks on the other, and a porthole that looks out on nothing but open water for weeks at a time. It's the one cabin on this deck that exists purely because someone has to start somewhere. The personal items in a junior officer's cabin read differently from those in the ratings quarters below. Fewer family photographs, more professional materials, a navigation almanac, a worn copy of the ISM code, a certification folder the officer added to and reorganized before departure. The longing for home is still there, but the middle decks hold people in the middle of building something, and the room reflects that. There's a goal visible in the paperwork that isn't present in the cabins one floor down. Every ship also carries at least 1 or 2 spare cabins on the middle decks, sometimes called owner's cabins or pilot cabins. They sit empty for most of a voyage. Then a harbor pilot boards to guide the ship through a narrow strait, or a company superintendent flies out to inspect the vessel mid-charter, or an inspector from the flag state shows up unannounced, and for 48 hours that empty room becomes the most closely watched cabin on the ship, because whoever's staying in it is usually there to judge everyone else's. One level below the bridge sits the master's cabin, and it functions on an entirely different logic from everything below it. The door opens into what looks like an office, not a bedroom. A desk bolted to the deck, a small sofa, a coffee table with a raised lip so a cup doesn't slide off during a roll. Behind it, a private bedroom, a private bathroom, and a safe holding tens of thousands of dollars in physical cash for port fees and crew advances, along with the ship's registry papers and the crew's passports. None of the other 21 cabins have what this one has: a private internal stairway connecting directly to the bridge, deck to deck, straight up. If something goes wrong at 3 a.m., the master can be standing at the helm in under 30 seconds, in whatever he was sleeping in. That response time is built directly into the architecture of the ship. The desk in that room does more work than the bed does. A master on a modern container ship runs a mid-sized company's entire administrative department by himself. Cargo documentation, customs declarations for every port on the rotation, safety management paperwork, crew hours of rest logs, because regulators now require proof that nobody's being run into exhaustion, bunker receipts, incident reports, an email from the office asking why fuel consumption crept up 2% on the last leg. Ask captains directly, and most of them say the same thing without hesitation. They spend more hours a day at that desk than they do on the bridge. Every night before sleeping, the master writes what's called a night order, a handwritten instruction to whoever has the watch. The course, the expected traffic, the weather, and the exact conditions under which he needs to be woken. Visibility below a certain range. Any vessel projected to pass inside a set distance. Any deviation from the plan. And underneath all of it, a line that shows up in night order books on ships all over the world in some form or another. If in doubt, call me. The phone by his bed can end his rest at any hour of any night for the full length of the voyage. The personal items in the master's cabin carry a different weight entirely. There are photographs here too, but they're often older, worn at the edges, the kind that have been repacked and retacked in cabins across multiple vessels and multiple decades. A nautical chart of a route the master particularly remembers, framed on the wall. Sometimes a model ship on the desk that looks incongruous next to the customs folders. These are the rooms of people deep into a career, not building toward one. The mementos are retrospective, not aspirational. The best cabin on the ship is also, physically, the worst place to be in bad weather. A ship doesn't roll around its outer deck, it rolls around an axis near its center, which means the farther you are from that axis, the more violently you move with every single roll. The person sleeping on the lowest deck moves a few feet. The person sleeping 8 decks up, at the stern, where the accommodation block usually sits, moves considerably more. Same roll, longer arc. The highest-ranking person on the ship, in the largest cabin, at the top of the house, sleeps in one of the most violently moving rooms on the entire vessel. In heavy weather, some masters give up on the bunk entirely and sleep in the day room, or in a smaller berth built directly behind the bridge because it's closer to the center of the motion. The best room and the roughest ride belong to the same person. One more thing separates that top cabin from every other room in the house, and it's about isolation. The master eats in the officer's saloon, often at his own table, keeping distance from the crew, because the moment he has to make a hard call about someone's job or someone's safety, familiarity becomes a liability. Command at sea has always been a solitary job, and for most of maritime history, that isolation ran deep. 15 years ago, contact with home meant satellite minutes billed by the second, rationed for birthdays and short emails. Low-orbit satellite internet changed that almost overnight. Video calls from the middle of the Pacific, a bedtime story read to a kid 4,000 miles away. Ask senior captains what changed most in their careers, and most of them point to the same thing. The loneliest room on the ship finally got a little less lonely. Walk the house from bottom to top, and the real pattern becomes visible. Function determines everything. Every rank on that ship gets a room that matches exactly what the ship needs from them. The ratings get the loudest room because their job is physical and their schedule is fixed. The junior officers get a room built around a broken sleep cycle because their job is watchkeeping. The cadet gets the smallest room on the middle deck because the ship needs him there, learning before he earns anything larger. And the master gets a private stairway and a safe full of cash because his job is being reachable in 30 seconds, at any hour, for 4 to 6 months straight. 22 people. 22 completely different relationships with the same 200,000-ton hull. The rating closest to the engine feels it in his sleep every night for 9 months. The cadet in the walk-in closet is putting in the time to eventually earn one of the rooms above him. The chief mate's cabin functions as a second cargo office more nights than it functions as a bedroom. And the master's cabin, the biggest, the highest, the only one with a private staircase to the bridge, swings the hardest in a storm and empties out the fastest once the door closes for the night. Every one of them signed a contract that put them exactly where the ship needed them to be. Nobody ends up in a cabin on a vessel like this by accident. The whole house, top to bottom, answers one question. How fast does this person need to be reachable? And how much can the ship afford to give them in exchange for that? The calendar on the able seaman's locker and the night order book on the captain's desk are both counting the same voyage. They're doing it from opposite ends of the same building, in rooms that have nothing in common except the hull underneath them and the water outside.